Paris, a city of perfection and passion. And on its border, a palace filled with secrets dark and strange. The encrypted letters of the ill-fated Marie Antoinette, the deadly skills of the Musketeers, and the invention of an assassination machine. Secrets hidden in plain sight inside the Chateau of Versailles. Every year on the outskirts of Paris, 10 million visitors flock to a museum that was once a royal palace. Versailles. In these rooms, kings ruled France and much of Europe by convincing their subjects they were appointed by God.
It's a theater, Versailles. It's a place for a permanent show by the king of its unique person and power.
From the arrival of the Sun King Louis XIV in 1682 until the beginning of the French Revolution in 1789, Versailles was the epicenter of the nation. Here, the monarchs of France commissioned exquisite treasures, made beautiful babies, and started bloody wars. This solemn gallery is known as the Hall of Battles. Many French regiments are represented here, including some that still exist today. But this uniform was only worn for a few decades. It has the white cross of the Musketeer.
The Three Musketeers.
In the movies, the Musketeers are happy-go-lucky warriors off on an adventure. Porthos, Athos, Aramis, and the young D'Artagnan thrust and parry their way to victory. The cry of one for all and all for one. But what was it really like to be a musketeer? That is our museum secret. The story begins at the 17th century Chateau Vaux-le-Vicomte, where Louis XIV attended lavish parties, accompanied by his musketeers. These modern swordsmen are experts in the musketeers' history and fighting technique. And today, they've agreed to train a new recruit.
Bonjour. Bienvenue dans ma salle d'armes.
Thank you very much. I'm Rob. Nice to meet you.
Michel.
Hi.
Robert Miles is an actor who's going to play D'Artagnan in The Three Musketeers.
So, what are we going to be doing today, then?
Nous allons apprendre à nous battre comme des mousquetaires.
Ah, sounds good to me. Okay.
To be here as a British actor fighting these French former world champion stage combat fighters, you don't get opportunities like that very often, to be honest, and I'm really hoping that I can make the most of it.
One.
Ici. Three.
Rob also hopes to learn something about the Musketeers as people. It turns out that the fictional D'Artagnan was based on a real nobleman from Gascony, a region famed for producing fiery warriors.
What about the attitude of D'Artagnan as a person? Did he like fighting? Did he do it because he had to?
I am D'Artagnan.
You are D'Artagnan, okay.
Si je fais ça.
Okay.
Okay, on va
So he
se battre.
wants to fight. Okay.
Quick to anger.
Very quick to anger. Okay, that's good stuff to know. All right, and is that because of where he comes from? Is that a Gascon trait?
A Gascon.
That's very okay. I see.
In reality, as in the movies, Musketeers trained to be deadly swordsmen.
Got me there. Absolutely made a mistake, and it cost me my life.
Hollywood's Musketeers spar with the Cardinal's men, and their exploits are often played for laughs. The real Musketeers had a more serious mission. The crosses on their uniforms symbolized their holy calling. They were the king's bodyguards, which made them God's bodyguards. Every musketeer swore to protect his god king with his life. When the king attended social functions, like the ones at this chateau, he faced potential threats from assassins. At any second, his musketeers might be put to the test.
Dis-moi, Aramis, ne tue pas surtout.
Sure, you could be a musketeer. Really? This is my father's sword. Stuck to rust teeth, you think? Still sharp enough to run you through.
Pour vraiment faire un mousquetaire tel que c'est prévu, tel qu'on voit dans la tête du public, Rob devrait avoir une gestuelle beaucoup plus d'amplitude, plus de dynamisme. Je suis pas inquiet parce que Rob, je pense qu'il fera un très beau mousquetaire si on lui apprend, encore une fois, à avoir cette technique de Gascogne.
Rob is starting to think that the life of a musketeer would have been great fun, just like in the movies. But what he doesn't know is that when Louis XIV declared war, everything changed. To understand what happened, Rob visits Versailles' Hall of Battles to meet historian Hervé Drevillon.
Their mission first was to protect the king's life, but they also had the mission to fight in battles. On their flag, you can see a bomb falling, and the motto was, where they fall, the death is running with them.
I see, okay, right. So wherever they go,
Yes,
death follows with them.
Yes.
Right, wow, biblical.
As the king's men, they were expected to be the bravest and the ones to lead the charge.
They were often called enfants perdus, lost children.
Lost children?
Yes.
Really?
They were called so because there was a very high rate of losses during the fight.
In the movies, the story ends with D'Artagnan receiving his commission and a musket. In real life, D'Artagnan got a musket ball through the throat and died on the battlefield. So many musketeers were lost defending their god king that Louis XIV retired the name of the company.
Coming into this, obviously, with only an understanding of D'Artagnan from pop culture, it's really shown me how I can maybe do it differently and perhaps change the performance that I was intending to give prior to coming here.
A darker, grittier D'Artagnan may be just what is needed to revive the Musketeer franchise for a new generation. Up next, the mysterious death of a king's mistress. At the Palace of Versailles, the kings of France chose their wives to enhance political alliances and produce heirs to the throne. But for love and for sexual pleasure, kings looked elsewhere, to the ladies-in-waiting of their court. Some of the most famous mistresses in French history graced Versailles. Madame de Pompadour, Madame du Barry, and Louis XIV's Madame de Montespan.
She was enormously clever and the greatest beauty of her generation. She was extremely passionate, extremely glamorous. She gambled like a drunken soldier and made love like a Parisienne whore. She was really a quite extraordinary character. And it wasn't considered at all scandalous to be the lover of the king.
The inevitable illegitimate children such liaisons produced were welcomed as proof of a king's virility. But there was a time when it was scandalous to be a mistress. In the turbulent 15th century, much of France was occupied by the English. The French king, Charles VII, was forced to flee with his court from Paris to the Loire Valley. Although Charles had a wife and children, he was transfixed by the arrival of a new lady-in-waiting named Agnès Sorel. Charles took Agnès to his bed. But after 6 years as the king's mistress, the young woman dropped dead of unknown causes. How did Agnès Sorel die? And did she leave a mark on history? Those are our museum secrets. In France today, there is no history detective more accomplished than forensic paleopathologist Philippe Charlier.
My job is doing forensic autopsies. So I have to take all these samples to analyze them in order to say what is the cause of death, what is the circumstances of death, the manner of death. I'm like a doctor, but a too late doctor.
Recently, Charlier went to the town of Loches to investigate the death of Agnès Sorel. Some suspected that her final resting place was here, in this medieval church. Beside the altar, there is a sarcophagus with the wings of an angel and an inscription that reads, "The Woman of Beauty."
So we wanted to exhume the body, or what remained of the body, and to first confirm the identity of this individual, then try, if possible, to find the cause of death for this woman.
The burial urn contained a human skull. Analysis of the teeth revealed it was that of a young woman. And facial reconstruction matched the likeness of Agnès Sorel. Her coffin is next door to the castle, where she spent the last years of her life. Here she bore King Charles 3 children, and also made her mark on the history of fashion.
Elle porte une de ces célèbres robes lacées à la gourgandine qui permettait de présenter un magnifique sein.
Agnès brought a style formerly reserved for prostitutes to the king's court. But she wasn't just eye candy. She took a keen interest in politics. Agnès learned that the war with the English was going badly because her beloved king had run out of money to pay his troops. She used her considerable charm to convince rich nobles to back the king.
Sans jamais abuser de sa beauté, elle va permettre à Charles VII de financer sa campagne.
With these resources, Charles defeated the English and secured his borders. To show Agnès his appreciation, the king did something no French king had done before. He made her his official mistress.
The official mistress was effectively a job at court. She would have her own apartments, she would have her own servants, she would receive visits in her own right as a significant member of the court.
Church elders were horrified that a mere mistress should be given such high status. Undeterred, Charles went one step further. He showed his love for Agnès by making their children legitimate. This infuriated Charles' eldest son, who feared the children would one day threaten his claim to the throne.
Il est possible qu'on ait imaginé la faire disparaître.
Her enemies had reasons to want her dead. But to discover proof that she was murdered, Dr. Philippe Charlier needed to determine her cause of death by examining the physical evidence.
We found a lot of eggs and a lot of parasites inside the remains of the body.
Charlier also detected small amounts of mercury.
Why mercury? We know that mercury was used during this period, Middle Ages, Renaissance, for the cure of internal parasites.
The mercury could be explained as medication. But when Charlier did the same test on her hair, the mercury levels spiked.
This testifies really of a very large amount of mercury in the 2 or 3 days before death.
Perhaps someone added mercury to her medication, or forced her to ingest it. Either way, Agnès received a lethal dose.
So it was maybe an accident, it's possible, but maybe it was also a crime in order to destroy the most important influence she had on the king.
But if someone took her life to end her influence, they failed. From that time on, being the king's mistress was no longer scandalous.
It was really a career, and a very serious one at that, and one for which many, many women were very happy to compete. The first official mistress was Agnès Sorel, and after that it was used for every woman who occupied the position of the favoured lover of the king.
After her death, Agnès Sorel was long mourned by her king. We suspect that on her coffin are traces of his tears. Next on Museum Secrets, the Queen loses her head. For modern visitors to its gilded halls, Versailles can feel like a setting for lifestyles of the rich and famous. And that's because it was. Those who lived here were the celebrities of their day, and the dazzle reminded everyone who was boss: the king.
The king is a holy person. He's been chosen by God to be the king of France.
So in 1789, King Louis XVI was unprepared for the revolution, when his subjects stormed the Bastille, declared all men equal, and 4 years later sent him to the guillotine. But though his death changed history, his wife is better known. Marie Antoinette, portrayed as a spoiled, childish libertine who said, "Let them eat cake," when told that starving French peasants had no bread.
There's that tragic glamour of doomed celebrity about Marie Antoinette.
But was she just a shallow celebrity, the victim of circumstances she didn't understand? The truth is a museum secret. The story begins in Versailles, 3 months after the fall of the Bastille.
5th of October, rumours reached Versailles that a furious, starving mob was preparing to march on the palace. The royal family was held very much to blame for the famine that was afflicting the country.
In the middle of the night, a violent faction stormed the palace looking for Marie Antoinette.
The Queen, like a magnet, has really concentrated all the hatred in France.
They attacked and killed her bodyguards. Marie Antoinette did not intend to be the next victim. She took a secret passageway.
So the Queen went through these small doors leading to the King's apartment, and she reached, at the end, this main door, and unfortunately, the door was locked from the other side. There was a valet of the King, not very far, who heard and who unlocked it.
Marie Antoinette had saved herself, but her ordeal had just begun.
At dawn, this whole area was full of furious, shouting people demanding to see the royal family.
The king promised to look into the shortage of bread. Then rioters shouted for a word from the Queen.
The million-dollar question about Marie Antoinette, the one that every schoolboy knows. Did she say, "Let them eat cake"? Well, she certainly spent a great deal too much money on dresses and jewels, but she really didn't say anything quite so callous.
In fact, she said nothing. She stared down the mob until a few began to chant, "Long live the Queen." But others shouted bitch and whore. By nightfall, the royals were ordered to Paris.
It was a hideous journey. The royal family looked out of the windows of their coach to see the heads of the 2 bodyguards stuck on bleeding pikes being waved at the windows of their carriage.
They spent the next 4 years under house arrest until the revolutionaries decided France couldn't move forward while the king was alive. They solved the problem. But for some, the king's execution wasn't enough.
Marie Antoinette was brought here to the conciergerie in August 1793.
Prisoners of the revolution were kept here while awaiting trial.
The trial of Marie Antoinette is an absolute shame and disgrace. Absolute. No respect of the rules, no chances left to the defense.
Her celebrity had made her a target.
Most of the accusations by witnesses were entirely specious. She was accused of spying, of contempt for the people, of orgiastic behavior, of drunkenness, even though she was a well-known teetotaler. Perhaps the worst of them was that she had committed incest with her then 7-year-old son.
And so it appears the revolutionaries convicted an innocent victim. Or maybe not. In the French National Archives are several revealing letters written by Marie Antoinette while she was under arrest.
One of Marie Antoinette's most important correspondents was her old friend, and some say lover, the Swedish diplomat Count Axel von Fersen.
These letters were written in a secret code.
A code word would be chosen for each letter, after which different letters would correspond, line by line, alternately, to produce a new set of phrases.
The code could only be deciphered with a keyword.
What's moving, I suppose, about the key word here is that it is courage. It seems a fairly desperate cri de coeur.
You might think these were love letters, but they're not. They're about politics.
Marie Antoinette was intensely aware of France's political situation. She spent a great deal of time at her correspondence with her potential allies.
She pleaded with von Fersen and other foreign leaders to help restore the monarchy by invading France.
This is high treason. She betrayed her country. The hate was too strong. She had to die.
And Marie Antoinette remained remarkably calm and composed. As she walked up the steps of the scaffold, she did accidentally stand on the executioner's foot, for which she apologized very graciously, saying that she hadn't done it on purpose.
It's a tragic fate. From so high to so low.
Marie Antoinette understood the political storm that was about to engulf her, but she could not stop it. As for Versailles, no royal celebrity would ever live here again. But the dazzling show goes on in a palace now owned by the people. Coming up, the secrets of an inventive assassin. After the French Revolution of 1789, no royal would inhabit the halls of Versailles. But post-revolutionary history hangs on its walls. A soldier named Napoleon rose to rule France and all of Europe. His formidable army numbered 600,000. But after a failed attempt to conquer Russia and a final defeat by the British at Waterloo, France fell into turmoil. This is the period portrayed in the many versions of Victor Hugo's Les Miserables. In July of 1830, an insurrection broke out, but the new revolutionaries, called the Republicans, could not prevail. Instead, a nobleman named Louis Philippe was crowned king. Historian Monroe Price is an expert on this chaotic era.
Violence against Louis Philippe and his regime began very soon after the July Revolution. And this was basically because of the Republicans, who were furious that a republic had not been the result of the July Revolution and that their revolution had been stolen from them by Louis Philippe.
In a gallery of Versailles closed to the public, this painting depicts an event that happened 5 years after Louis Philippe's coronation, when a royal procession went horribly wrong.
C'est une panique totale dans la foule puisqu'il y a des gens qui sont renversés, des chevaux qui sont tués, des gens qui baignent dans leur sang.
The trouble's cause is hard to see, but if one looks closely, at a second-floor window, there is a puff of smoke. What happened here is a museum secret. Our story begins in the slums of Paris. In the 1830s, it was home to impoverished war veterans, including a man named Giuseppe Fieschi.
He was an extraordinary man, in fact. He'd been a soldier in Napoleon's army and had actually survived the retreat from Moscow. So he was certainly a tough man and had some brains, intelligence and practical skill.
Fieschi fell in with Republican conspirators who wanted to assassinate King Louis Philippe. They had learned that an upcoming royal procession would travel down one of the central boulevards of Paris. In return for a fortune, Fieschi agreed to shoot the king and swore to safeguard the conspirators' identities. To begin his preparations, Fieschi visited the Boulevard du Temple and rented an upstairs room. From here, the king's procession would be within musket range. But there was a problem. Muskets take many seconds to reload. Fieschi would need to kill the king with the first shot, or there would be no time for a getaway. he wasn't sure it could be done. On a gun range near Paris, Monroe will explore what was going on in Fieschi's mind.
Fieschi prepared for his attempt on King Louis Philippe's life with great care. He knew that he was facing a moving target. The king was going to be on horseback, he was going to be surrounded by several of his sons and his staff, so it was quite a difficult target to hit.
Targets representing Louis Philippe and his retinue have been placed at a distance from a marksman equal to the distance from Fieschi's window to the street below.
As you see, it's unlikely that with just that one shot, he'd have hit Louis Philippe.
Fieschi knew it. But as a war veteran, he also knew firsthand the deadly power of massed muskets. Fieschi wondered, how could that firepower be employed by a lone assassin? Necessity was the mother of invention.
This machine we see here is the so-called, has come to be known as the Infernal Machine, named after its inventor and its first and so far only operator, Giuseppe Fieschi. It is 25 musket barrels arranged on a wooden frame.
The night before the king's procession, things did not go as Fieschi had planned.
He and his collaborator, Moret, charged all the musket barrels with bullets and buckshot.
What Fieschi didn't know was that Moret tampered with some of the barrels. The conspirators didn't trust Fieschi to keep their plot secret. The next morning, the king's procession approached, along with a boisterous crowd.
He would have heard certainly a great deal of noise, he'd have heard drums beating, he'd have heard military music, and he must have been extremely tense. There was no way of knowing whether the machine would in fact work. Fieschi set off his machine by putting a match to the powder train at about the 13th musket barrel.
Many barrels fired true, but some exploded in Fieschi's face. In the street, the barrage wreaked havoc.
The scene was almost indescribable and very shocking and terrible. 18 people around the king were killed. 22 people were injured.
But the assassination attempt failed.
He missed the king by a whisker, almost literally a whisker.
Fieschi himself was not so lucky. He'd been hit by shrapnel from an exploding barrel.
It made a gash in his forehead that was so deep that when he was arrested, his brain could be seen beating through the gore.
The king's surgeons saved his life so he could face justice. He never knew that one of his own group of conspirators was responsible for the exploding barrels, so he kept his side of the bargain and refused to incriminate the others.
Fieschi had pleaded guilty, so it was perfectly clear that he would go to the guillotine.
Louis Philippe commissioned this painting to commemorate a moment of terror and his near escape from death. The king would keep his throne as the last king of France, while Fieschi would lose his head. Coming up, the secret of a monk's elixir. Inside the Versailles Palace, museum director Beatrix Saul has agreed to reenact a ritual from the days of Louis XIV. Once a day, this baton was paraded through the halls to signal a momentous event, the king's dinner. By royal decree, his subjects were allowed to watch him eat his usual enormous meal.
4 assiettes de soupe, et puis ensuite un faisan, et puis ensuite une perdrix, les ragoûts, les oils, c'est-à-dire les viandes très cuites, bien en sauce grasse, et encore une assiette de pâtisserie et des œufs durs pour terminer.
Meanwhile, 200 kilometers away in this French monastery, a humble monk led a much simpler life. This monk shared just one thing with Louis XIV. They were both born in the year 1638. The two men would never meet, but their lives would intersect in an intimate way. How this happened is a museum secret. At Versailles, the courtiers catered to every whim of Louis XIV. The monk, on the other hand, had to cater to the whims of his abbot, who ordered him to make wine to pay for the monastery's upkeep. Unfortunately, the monastery was located in a northerly province. The winters sometimes killed grapevines. To wine enthusiast Alexandre Loire and vintner Richard Geoffroy, the monk's vineyard is a small miracle.
Here the background is really the Clos Sacré. It's really the original vineyard.
Not only was the climate cold, the soil was chalky.
It's very hard for the roots of the vines to progress and the chalk. The greatest wines always come from marginal situations. Greatness always comes on a constraint. Never in comfort.
The constraints the monk had to contend with were not only above ground, but below, in the monastery's wine cellars.
During winter, the yeasts are slowing down their activity. So people realized that at springtime, the wine was fermenting again.
Double fermentation causes carbon dioxide bubbles.
At that time, bubbles in the wine were not considered as a competitive advantage. It was more a defect of the wine.
And the carbon dioxide also caused the bottles to explode. With religious zeal, the monks strove to minimize the bubbles and maximize the taste by combining green and red grapes in a unique way.
He has been the very first man who decided to blend the grapes prior to press them. And he succeeded to create what he called later the best wine in the world.
When Louis XIV tried the monk's wine, he loved it. For the monk, life was good. The wine was named for his home province, which happens to be called Champagne. But for Louis XIV, as the years passed, life became excruciating. His heavy diet had caused a swelling of the extremities called gout. The royal feet became a royal pain. But no matter what his doctors told him, he wouldn't cut back on dinner or on the glass of champagne he had with every meal. His senior physician claimed champagne was good for him, while others insisted it was worsening his condition and even shortening his life. At the time, there was no way to prove who was right. At this modern wine testing lab in Champagne, Alexandre Loire hopes to discover the answer.
Is it possible to know if the wine of Champagne is good for health or not?
In order to assess this, so I'm going to use this device, which is capable of measuring the total antioxidant capacity.
Health-giving antioxidants are sometimes in the form of vitamin C, which happens to be a modern treatment for gout. Dr. Oda has found high levels of antioxidants in red wine, while in white wine they are much lower. As for champagne, you might think that because it looks a lot like white wine, it too will be low in antioxidants. Dr. Oda is about to find out.
On a un résultat
équivalent micromolaire de vitamine C, donc on a un résultat qui est bien intermédiaire entre le vin blanc, le vin rouge, donc entre le pinot noir et le chardonnay.
In fact, champagne has double the antioxidants of white wine, which makes sense, because just as it was in the monk's day, today's version is a unique blend of red grapes and green.
Si j'avais été son médecin, là, je vous aurais conseillé de prendre un petit verre, donc ou de champagne ou de pinot noir au choix. Hein?
So champagne probably eased the king's gout, and it certainly didn't shorten his life. Louis XIV lived to the ripe old age of 77. He died in 1715. Coincidentally, so did the monk who made champagne. Oh, and one more thing. His name was Dom Perignon. Next on Museum Secrets, the Sun King goes supernova. King Louis XIV clad Versailles in stone. But his palace is all about light.
If we start with this room, his official state bedroom, it's built on an east-west axis so that the sun rises when the monarch rises and sets when he goes to bed.
During the day, sunlight from the gardens filled Louis's great hall of mirrors. Anyone who gazed upon him here would be blinded by reflected brilliance. The message was, I am the Sun King. I alone have the power to bestow life, or withhold it. But while Louis was the self-proclaimed source of light, he also liked to be enlightened.
He always was very anxious that he hadn't been quite as well educated as a king ought to be. So he was always trying to make up for this. He wanted to read history books. He wanted to know what was happening in philosophy, in the sciences. He would bring the best people to him to do that.
In 1666, Louis created the French Academy of Sciences. To allow his academy to explore the heavens, he built a world-class observatory in Paris. In the 17th century, its telescopes revealed the craters of the moon and the gap in the rings of Saturn. And in 1858, a French astronomer built a telescope here that was more powerful than any made before.
There was a kind of revolution. Léon Foucault, who worked in this observatory, invented the modern reflecting telescope.
This telescope revealed a mystery that led to a discovery about the origin of life on Earth. It's a museum secret that Louis XIV would find hard to believe. Our investigation begins at a modern observatory in Toronto, Canada. Astronomer Ray Jayawardena is the kind of cutting-edge thinker that Louis would have invited to join his academy.
Astronomy is, quite different from the other sciences in that most of what we know comes from just decoding light.
The decoding started with Isaac Newton.
Isaac Newton used a prism to spread sunlight into the colors of the rainbow.
He called the colors in sunlight a spectrum. Soon after, prisms would reveal the spectra of earthly sources of light.
It was long known that different elements burn with different colors. And when scientists looked through a prism, they realized that each element had a distinct spectrum. For instance, when we look at helium gas through a prism, we can see its distinct spectrum.
The same is true for other elements. Astronomers wondered if earthly elements can be identified by their spectrum. Perhaps a prism can reveal the elements burning in a star. And that brings us back to the Paris Observatory, to the first astronomers to use the powerful Foucault telescope.
Charles Wolf and Georges Rayet were two astronomers working in this observatory around 1860. They don't want only to look at the star itself, but they want to have a spectrum. So they have to use this device, which is a prism. And they put that in front of the eyepiece like that, and then they could see the spectrum of the star.
Through a prism, most stars look much like this. But when Wolf and Rayet scanned the constellation Cygnus, they found 3 stars that displayed bright spots of yellow and blue.
And they could see very bright emissions at certain places on the spectrum. This is very special. These are the only stars which have this characteristic.
They were named Wolf-Rayet stars. But Wolf and Rayet never discovered which elements give them their unique spectrum.
So this remained a mystery for many, many years.
In the 20th century, more powerful telescopes allowed astronomers to see Wolf-Rayet stars in a close-up view.
And here's an image taken with the Hubble Space Telescope, one of the Wolf-Rayet stars that we know of. As you can see, the actual star is right at the center, but surrounding it is all of this other material.
With modern instruments, the spectra of the swirling material reveal a primordial brew.
In those outer layers are elements like carbon and oxygen and nitrogen that were cooked up inside those stars. These layers are being expelled into space.
These stars are the early stages of something much bigger.
Astronomers believe that Wolf-Rayet stars will go on to explode fully, completely as supernovae. Supernovae are spectacular explosions that really seed our galaxy with the elements that are essential for life. The oxygen we breathe, the iron in our blood, and calcium in our bones comes from these stars. And if not for those elements, we wouldn't be here. So Wolf-Rayet stars are vital for life as we know it.
Life that includes you and me, and the Sun King, Louis XIV. Louis believed that he had the power to bestow life, but in reality, Wolf-Rayet stars are the real Sun Kings. In a museum where royalty and revolution meet, for every mystery we reveal, far more must remain unspoken. Secrets of unbalanced minds and of courageous hearts, hidden in plain sight inside the Chateau of Versailles.